I had woken up, it was cold, first thing in the morning, I'd put some music on and I started getting to work. My name's Salvatore. I used to play quite a lot of video games back in the day, and I kind of really sucked at something, and that was when I kind of put a bit of time in and managed to get better at it. So to kind of explain this, I have to go back a little bit, but if you listen today, I will share with you what I learned from over 3,000 hours worth of practice and how that could applied or transpire into other aspects of your life, my life, and also to your life, what you can use going forward. So please join me and let's get into it. So like I was saying, there was a point where I was playing a lot of video games and I kind of picked up this thing called a yo-yo, and I wanted to, which is this right here, I wanted to get I went to a competition when I was pretty young into practice and my journey of this, and I got absolutely smashed, and I was really embarrassed with how I went. So it made me want to, basically, it kind of made me cry a bit. I was really upset. I was frustrated. It kind of made me realize that if I really want to get better at this and get to a point where I'm really impressed with what I've done, I would actually have to put some serious work in, which is where the first lesson I'm going to share with you today about how I awaken that effectively. So for the first lesson, I simply found a thick and unused notebook, like one of those small spiral bound ones. And what I had done is I had started or committed to practice that day. And however much practice I did in that day was what I recorded as my first session or bout of practice in relation to the yo-yo. And that's kind of where it first started, because it kept me accountable to say, okay, well, I know on this day I did this much. That might mean the next day I do a bit more, next day I do a bit less, or I miss a few days. So it kept me accountable to wanting to get better at something and understanding that there is consistency involved. And by kind of writing that down, it made me get proud of doing the practice, and made me want to show up the next day and then the next day and so on and so forth. So it was kind of something that, even though it was like a couple of dollars, this notepad and just a generic pen, the act of this spoke volumes above what you'd think it would mean. So that kind of was the first part, and I could kind of see that objectively, by putting more and more time into said practice, there we are, hang on, sorry, more and more time into said practice, I could actually objectively see I was starting to get a bit better. I was starting to have a bit more fluidity. I was starting to hit tricks more consistently. And that was all because of starting that, which you kind of think at the start of doing anything, you kind of feel ashamed to do so. But by effectively logging the first instance or tracking the progress to say, this day I started this, is where you kind of begin your story, or you're almost like creating a new save in a video game. And that's kind of where the whole journey then kicks off. It's a clear indication of when that practice or road or journey will begin, which is really cool. So that takes me to the next point that made it really helpful to kind of get to that level of the 3,000 hours plus worth of practice, which was music. So you see, the thing is, with the yo-yo, you kind of create tricks which then lead to a combination of tricks, which then, when put in combination, so combos put in with other combos, effectively leads to what is called a routine. But a routine is done with music, meaning that you have to perform said routine to music. So this is where music is important, because you have to think of performing something to either a beat or having some type of story that you explain through your tricks, kind of like what a performance, simply put. So by having and listening to a lot of different music, it helped me to think more creatively and really put in those sessions and kind of find another way to enjoy it, because there was like a nice song going along, and it made it more like I was able to tap into the zone of concentration, which then helped me to basically get to that like next level and really enjoy having longer hours of practice. Or that's the thing, practicing for hours opposed to practicing for just in minutes, consistently day after day, even first thing in the morning before I would go to school, which would seem a bit weird, but that was something I was really passionate and driven towards, opposed to before when I didn't log my practice, didn't really care, didn't really see where I was going with it. It kind of helped to build out the story and build out that consistency for me to do so. So then that takes us to the third point about what was really helpful to get to that next level. Okay, so we're practicing with music, we're making tricks, combos, and we're kind of starting a routine, but what's the point? Okay, well, the point of this is simple. If you're going to do all this practice, the intensity of the practice will be determined by what your goal you have in mind is. And if your goal is very ethereal or not very solid, or there's no date on it, you can kind of lapse and plateau a bit, which is why there's the importance of this third step, which is entering competitions and or crystallizing your practice into something that you can realize. So what I mean by this is, by going to a performance or a competition, and performing your routine means that you have to dedicate a lot of time to practice. You have to pick your song, you have to pick your tricks, you have to nail your tricks, you have to get consistent at nailing your tricks, time in again and again and again, up to a certain point in time where you have to display the best version of that, and then that's it. You crystallize that into something visual, and then you can basically use that as a waypoint to say, okay, at this point in 6 months of yoyoing, my first routine, here's what I was able to amount to. And then you go forward another 6 months of the next competition, and you can see kind of what you were able to do that next time. And then you can kind of see that progression. But by putting that pressure and stress on yourself, you have to push yourself even further to come up with said tricks, start thinking about how things work in combination with itself, opposed to just practicing for the sake of it. You're practicing to a goal. It's kind of like if you were given an assignment and it didn't have a due date versus a clear due date, like what would, like, you know what I mean? Like, you'd be more driven to actually complete the assignment that has a due date because you're going to get assessed, whereas the other one that doesn't, you'll kind of just not really care about it because, well, what's the point? And that's exactly what I'm getting at, crystallizing. Now, in the situations where there wasn't really a competition, I was able to realize this in another way, because being in Australia, yo-yo scene really isn't prominent. So I was able to crystallize my tricks in another format, which was creating an online video on YouTube and effectively doing that routine or doing a set of tricks to music. That meant that I was basically doing a routine, but making it perfect such that I could film a combo, which would be 30 seconds to a minute, put those together, stylistically, and then that would then result in, again, like a performance, and then I could, that would be it, cut it and upload it, and then I could move on to the next set of tricks. Because for me, there was something very rewarding about showing and crystallizing something that you come up with, but also being able to be free of that and starting over again, to crystallize something else, or to push yourself further, or to think in a way and put tricks together in kind of for a different format or for the next thing. The next thing is kind of what really I think helped me to develop. And if I probably could have done it again and kind of gone back in time, I would have made more of a point to upload videos more consistently, such that I was putting more pressure on myself to create stuff quicker. I mean, not in such a way that would lead to burnout, but in such a way that would mean I was always thinking about how to showcase what I was working on, to always push myself creatively to really crystallize stuff in such a manner. So I think that would have really helped to skyrocket kind of between my routines themselves. Not routines, competitions. Which then takes me to the fourth point, which is really important. Being around those that are better than you or ahead of where you are, that would mean that in this way, being around those that are ahead of you in something you're trying to get better at is fantastic, because those people will see and recognize what you're doing, particularly if you've practiced a lot and you're very into what you're into. Like for me, working on very specific tricks and showcasing that made others want to like respect me and, you know, say that's really good and kind of offer me their perspective in a very genuine and nice way, versus say people that don't really know what you're doing, aren't really in the sport, and might just critique you because they think it's lame or weird. The point of what I'm trying to get at is being around those that are better than you will only benefit you, because they'll be in a situation where they want to either teach you something or that you can learn from them. And that's what's important. Learning from them or kind of seeing what they're doing inspires you, it motivates you, you think differently, you kind of have a new creative element that's added outside of yourself that you might not have been able to realize, or just a little switch that gets flicked in your mind, which is why it's important to be around that community to effectively understand where you sit, but also understand what others are doing around you in your space to grow with them, learn from them. Well, not steal their tricks, but really kind of ask their perspective and approach the things such that you can potentially incorporate some of that into your rituals of how you practice, how you prepare for competition, and effectively just going forward into your journey, which is really important. Then that takes me to the fifth point. So this is kind of like, in terms of order of where you start at in the journey, this is kind of how it all comes full circle. Because you see, for the fifth point, this is really interesting. I found that at the start of doing my practice or my journey, I had a certain view in mind in terms of what type of yo-yo player I wanted to be. And that meant that I was kind of forcing myself into something and trying to do something in a very specific way, which is good and bad. So it was good in the sense that I was motivated to understand what I wanted to try out and endeavor to do so. But then that kind of was also bad because I realized there was a lot of drawbacks from that. So for example, I wanted to have very fast tricks, which I thought were really cool and got a lot of points, which kind of back in the day they did. But more to the point, those tricks were done like so fast and so simple that it was more of a situation that I would like mess those up. And you could tell it would be me forcing something, which isn't good. You're trying to like, it looks like you're imitating someone, which is kind of where the whole point of doing so much practice, being around others, listening to music, crystallizing tricks and stuff, you start to eventually develop your own style. But that can only come through understanding the basics, getting better at them, and understanding others in the space, seeing where they are, what they do, to understand where you want to see yourself and fit into the space. So for me, that kind of meant that my tricks actually evolved to be somewhat slower, because I enjoyed the technical elements of creating very tricky, difficult, kind of complex maneuvers that I kind of thought were really visually impressive, because of the intricacies and kind of different ways that I would have to unravel kind of the situation I would like create on the yo-yo string and with the elements and everything. That was kind of where my mine evolved into, and that was kind of really cool. But that could only kind of happen with the other like first 4 steps in place, to know enough about myself in terms of what tricks I actually like doing. So then it was more motivating, because I wasn't trying to be someone, I was just simply trying to be myself, because I really like creating this stuff. And then that meant that others could see that, and they were actually really impressed with the fact that I had developed that all myself to that point. So that's kind of like why with the 3,000 hours, even though you could say, well, I'm no longer doing the sport, I'm not competing, I didn't get paid from it. Okay, fair enough. Like, it's just like playing with a toy. That's true. But kind of reflecting on this now, I can kind of see how these 5 points can actually translate into your own life. So for example, like you might want to get better at running, you might want to ride a bike, you might want to get into cooking. You have to understand that what's most important is obviously practice. And then of course, practice for the sake of practice isn't really going to get you anywhere and be fun unless, of course, you're crystallizing that into something. In case of cooking a dish, in the case of running, I know I skipped a step. In case of running like a certain distance, and then the importance of kind of listening to music and having music to help inspire you, even on days that it's really difficult, is that it helps you to kind of build that consistency and start to figure out and expand beyond yourself where, like, what you're trying to do and help you with what you're doing. And then, of course, being around others that are better will motivate you, inspire you, help you realize what's possible. And then, of course, you can kind of learn from them, leverage off them. And then that will eventually lead, by putting all those things together and having enough practice, consistency, realization, and crystallization of your tricks or what you're trying to do, will then result in you creating your own style. And that's probably the most magical thing, because then you're really enjoying the process and it's fun. I mean, it's going to be fun before, but it's another level of fun where you know exactly kind of where you have, like, you see yourself and how you present in something, to figuring out that you did that all by yourself, and you can actually kind of, you have a style or method that you can teach to others, or say, here's what I did and this worked because XYZ. And then that can really help some other people, or some other people might not like that as much. But the point is, you can kind of inspire others and help them with their journey through showing that you've been able to start something, you know, you hit a new game and you've eventually saved your progress, continued to level up, and really have that way to take these 5 lessons from today: logging hours, music, crystallizing, being around others, developing your own style, to really create something magical in the world and kind of either inspire others, inspire yourself, and kind of get yourself out of that comfort zone, to realize that anything's possible, and that by conquering that mountain, you can conquer life itself. And all through kind of this 3,000 hours, I'm grateful that I did it, because it makes me realize that kind of with this, creating content for you and explaining kind of the story and how, what type of content I like to talk about, and the style of how I present it, really helps me to feel like I'm kind of in the early stages, and kind of will be eventually fun to kind of see how that transpires and the style that develops from my own self. Which of course then takes me to the end. Thank you for watching. Comment, subscribe. There'll be more stuff like this. I really appreciated it. Conquer mountains, conquer life. Thanks.